Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Vanessa Nixon. Vanessa Nixon is a traditional naturopath and the author of Metamorphosis, Rituals, Spells, and Natural Remedies for Peri, Mid, and Postmenopausal Women. Say that all really fast. And you can find out more about Vanessa Nixon and her wonderful work. She has two websites. Herbs of Grace, healingarts.com, and also herbsofgrace.com. Welcome, Vanessa Nixon.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm really delighted to be here today.
So Vanessa Nixon, we're going to be talking today and for our audience about the best herbs for sleep. And so many people all over the world have trouble sleeping. And, we try all these different ways to improve our sleep. Many people who use herbs for sleep need to be careful and informed about whenever we choose herbs. So what advice would you give to our audience if there's somebody who's listening and they want to use herbs to help them sleep? How can they go about that safely?
That's a great question. And I'm glad that you started out with that question, because I think there's a kind of a misconception out there that all herbs are safe. That because herbs are natural, it's safe and you can just use any herb that you want to. And I really want people to understand that while herbs are incredibly safe, especially compared to pharmaceutical medicine, we have thousands of years of, recorded documentation that herbs are very safe and effective. However, you really have to know what you're doing, because there are some herbs out there that have, that are low dose herbs that you can only use very, very small amounts, as in like drop doses. There are some herbs that have certain levels of toxicity. And so we need to make sure that we have at least a basic level of education when we are using herbs, especially herbs that might be new to us. It's really important to educate yourself or to work with someone who is knowledgeable in herbs and who has worked with them to a certain extent, so that they have, working knowledge.
So you and I were speaking before we started our recording about the companies that we use for herbs. And we're both in the US. And in the US, my favorite herb company is alchemy.com. And it's www.al-kemi.com. And what's really cool about their herbs is that they're alchemically based. And in alchemy, there's remedies for the physical body, there's remedies for the mind, and there's remedies for the soul. And it's a small company, husband, wife. I've been so blown away by their herbs that I've gone out and studied with them. And then Vanessa Nixon, you were telling people about, you were telling me that you like mountain rose herbs. So where can people find mountain rose herbs?
Yes, I've been using mountain rose herbs when I can't grow or harvest my own herbs. That's the company that I go to. You can find them at www.mountainroseherbs.com, and they have herbs in bulk. They have herbs in tinctures, and most all of their herbs are grown organically.
Now, one of my challenges as a medical intuitive healer, because I do work with people all over the world, is when I've got clients in other countries, where to refer them. So when there are clients in the UK, what herb companies do you recommend that they refer to for herbs in the UK or Europe?
Well, what I always tell people is the very best thing to do is to use the herbs that are growing around you. You know, most people have a backyard or they have a windowsill where they can, you know, grow herbs. And it's one of the things that I love the most about herbs is that it's a reciprocal relationship. And I think that we get the best benefits from herbs when we do really nurture that reciprocal relationship. So if you can grow your own herbs, I think that's the very best, the ideal situation. If you can't grow your own herbs, then I always say the next thing is to look locally for your local herb shop, you know, support your local businesses. So if you have a local herb shop that's well established, you know, go and get to know the owners of that local herb shop and talk to them about their herbs, about their education, and about where they source their herbs. It's really important that herbs are sourced well. There are a lot of herbs out there that are adulterated. And so you want to make sure that your local herb shops and your local herb growers are reputable. And then, you know, then the next step would be if you are not able to find something locally, then to go online. And as I said, my favorite is Mountain Rose Herbs, and they ship all over the world.
Great information. Now we're talking today about healing herbs for sleep. What are the healing properties of passionflower, and what are the contraindications for its use?
I love passionflower. That's one of my favorite sleep herbs. I use it myself occasionally, and passionflower is a nervine, and most of the herbs that we're going to talk about today are nervines, and that means that they have a beneficial effect on the nervous system, the central nervous system. Passionflower is also sedative. It has sedative properties, so it helps your body enter that state of being ready to sleep. And passionflower, what I like about it is that it is particularly effective for the kind of insomnia that is described by, you know, when you have that circular thinking, you know, you think about an issue and your mind just circles around and around and around, that mental chatter that you just can't stop. If that's the kind of insomnia that you have, passionflower is really great for that particular kind of sleeplessness. Another thing that is really nice about passionflower is that not only can it help you to fall asleep, but it can help you to stay asleep. So there are different kinds of insomnia, and sometimes it's that people fall asleep well, but then they wake up in the middle of the night and they can't go back to sleep. And so if that's the case, then passionflower can be really helpful with that. Another thing about passionflower is that it's not so strongly sedative that it kind of gives you that hangover feeling the next day. You know, sometimes when people, for instance, resort to something like melatonin or some of the other herbs that are really deeply sedative, the next morning they can kind of feel groggy. And passionflower does not have that. You can wake up, you know, just feeling very well rested and clear. And so it's one of those that is a really great all around herb for sleeplessness. It also, there's some specific indications for passionflower. So it can, these specific indications that some herbs have can help you to identify if that's the herb for you, because, you know, we're all unique. We're all individual, and herbs are that way too. And so it's one of the keys to finding a good herb for you is to find that good match with some of these specifics. And one of the specifics to passionflower is that it's very calming, especially for grief or states that are very similar to grief. So if you're in a state of grief, and if that is what is keeping you up at night, especially if you're crying a lot and that brings on a headache, if your grief brings on a headache, that's a specific indication for passion flower.
Great information. Now, Vanessa Nixon, as you know, herbs have many different names. The common names, such as passion flower, also the scientific name. Are there other names for passion flower that people can look for when they're at the herb shop?
Yeah, the botanical or the scientific name of passion flower is Passiflora incarnata. So that's the one that, and the scientific or botanical name is the identifier. Like you said, common names can change. There can be many different common names. So to make sure that you have the right herb, that's the name that you want to look for, is the botanical name.
No, it's interesting because you were talking about using herbs that are native to your area. I have an organic garden and I focus on flowers because that's what makes me happy. I have passion flower growing in my garden. As a matter of fact, it's a weed in my garden. It grows naturally. Like I never planted it. It just started growing there. So what part of the passion flower, is it the flower itself, the vine, the leaves? If I wanted to make a tincture out of the passion flower, what part would I use and how would I go about using that?
It's the flower and the leaf, and you could just harvest them and use them fresh. You could dry them and store them. It's really important when you are harvesting your plants that you, if you're going to dry them and store them, that you do that properly. And so, taking a class in basic herbalism is a great idea for anybody who wants to start learning how to use herbs. But making sure that it is thoroughly dry before you store it, and storing it in glass, out of the light, in a cool, dark place, is going to ensure that it lasts a long time.
Yeah, because you don't want to get things like mold in there.
Right, and that can happen. So you want to make sure that you dry it in a place where it gets good air circulation out of the sun until it's completely dry before you store it.
Now, what are the healing properties of skullcap? And will you share the scientific name? And let's go back to passion flower, because with every herb there are contraindications. So what are the contraindications for passion flower?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is true, that you want to make sure that there aren't any contraindications and that it is a good herb for you to use. Almost all the herbs that we're going to talk about today have the contraindication that you don't want to use them with other sedative drugs, because their benefits of helping you to sleep, helping to calm you down, and help put you to sleep, they will potentiate the effects of any sedative drugs, pharmaceutical drugs you might be taking, which means that they'll just make them work even better, which means you might get too much sedation. So you don't want to use any of these herbs with pharmaceutical sedative drugs.
Great information. Now, so skullcap, tell us about the healing properties of skullcap.
All right, skullcap is another one of my favorites, and it is one that grows here. The passion flower doesn't grow where I am natively, so I'm a little jealous that it grows in your garden so abundantly. But skullcap does grow here in the Pacific Northwest where I am. The botanical name is Scutellaria lateriflora, and skullcap is in the mint family. And so if you get to see it growing, you'll notice that it looks like many of the other mints, and it has the same shaped flower that most of the mint plants do. It's a really pretty little lavender flower. And it is the aerial parts, the leaves, mainly, and the flowers of skullcap that we use. I love skullcap. It's been traditionally used for centuries for a couple of different things, but mainly or very often as a sleep aid. And what I love about skullcap is that it's really gently relaxing and calming. It's a very gentle herb, but it has very powerful benefits. And I love that combination when an herb is very potent, but it's also very gentle. And for me, one of the things that means is that it can be a good choice for a wide range of people, you know, from elderly to children, you know, and anyone in between. So I love these gentle herbs that we have. So it helps to induce a normal sleep pattern without being really strongly sedative. And this also, for me, makes it a good herb to use in combination with other herbs. And while I'm talking about that, I just want to say for a moment that I love combining herbs. I love creating formulas for people, but one of the best things I think that people can do, especially when they are first starting with herbs, is to use herbs singly or use them one at a time, because then they can really get to know that herb and what its properties are and how that herb interacts with their own constitution. But there are some herbs that work really synergistically with other herbs as well. With skullcap, it is really kind of specific for the kind of insomnia that results from like nervous anxiety or restlessness, that kind of nervous tension in the body. So it's a tonic for the nervous system. So that means that it relieves nervous tension, but it also actually helps to renew the central nervous system. And that's another one of the reasons I really love skullcap, or any kind of tonic herb. You know, we have different categories of herbs, and one of those categories is tonic herbs. And that means it's something that can be taken for a long period of time. And it actually helps to rebuild the body's systems with its tonic nature. And so that is skullcap with the central nervous system. It can actually renew the central nervous system. So it's one of those herbs that's okay to take for long periods of time. So if you have, like, when you're going to sleep and your muscles kind of twitch a little bit, and that's what's keeping you awake, is muscle twitching or any kind of muscular tension, that can be a good indication that skullcap might be a really good herb for you.
And with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. We'll be right back. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, and we're learning about herbs to help you sleep. So Vanessa Nixon, you were talking about how there are tonic herbs that basically help us rebuild. What are the other general categories of herbs?
Oh, there are so many different categories of herbs. As we're talking about, you know, I've used words like sedative. There are sedative herbs. One of the herbs we're going to be talking about a little bit later is in the category of adaptogenic herbs, which are herbs that help your body adapt to stress. We have herbs that are basically suited to, you know, any bodily system. We have herbs that are tropho-restoratives, which are kind of like tonic herbs, but they even go a step further. in that they physically help to rebuild different organs in your body. And there are many, many, many different categories of herbs.
And that was tropo specific. Is that what the term is?
Tropho restorative.
Okay, tropho restorative. Well, we all learned something in these wonderful talks with our guests at the Natural Healing Show. So, Vanessa Nixon, anything else you want to share with us about Skullcap?
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to say about Skullcap is that if you're a person who would describe yourself as being oversensitive or highly sensitive, Skullcap might be a really good herb for you, especially if you find yourself in kind of those states of nervous exhaustion, especially if that kind of puts you into a little bit of a depression. If that is your picture, your symptom picture, then Skullcap might be a really good herb for you.
Now let's talk about California poppy. What is the botanical name for California poppy, and what are the healing properties of California poppy?
Eschscholzia californica. It has one of those names that's a little bit difficult to pronounce. California poppy, again, is one of these very gentle herbs. It is an herb that is often used for children. And so I love herbs, again, that are potent, that have that work really well, but they're so gentle, you can use them with children without, any worry about that. And so California poppy is one of those. And I want to say people often are a little bit hesitant to use California poppy, because when you think of poppy, a lot of times people think of opium poppies. And California poppy is not an opium poppy. So you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't have any opiates in it. That's not the reason that it helps with insomnia. It's just one of those herbs that is very calming. It's very mildly sedative. It's been used for hundreds of years. The Pacific Coast native people used it traditionally as a sedative, and also for pain, for mild pain. And so it's been used, for hundreds of years, and we have a lot of literature around it. So very, very safe, very calming. It's a very relaxing herb. It's often used for children that are so overexcited that they have trouble falling asleep. And so for those of us that have children, we know that state very well. And that is a perfect opportunity to use California poppy. One of the herbs we haven't talked about is chamomile. And chamomile is often also used with children. And so I kind of think of both chamomile and California poppy as really great herbs to use with children for helping them to calm down. But with California poppy, it's specifically for children who have that state of overexcitement. They're so excited they can't calm themselves down. So California poppy can really help their bodies to do that. Whereas chamomile is, I think of that more for children who are irritable, who have that irritability, or children who are in that state of crying, who just always kind of want to be carried. They don't want to be laid down to go to sleep. So that would be more of a chamomile picture. Whereas California poppy is just this, they're not upset, they're just overly excited, and it just helps them to relax so they can fall asleep.
Now, Vanessa Nixon, you just brought up chamomile. And as you know, lots of people drink chamomile tea before bed.
Yes.
In order to help them sleep. What are the healing properties of chamomile?
Well, chamomile is, again, it's very relaxing. It's very calming. And especially as I noted, for children, who are irritable, it's the same for adults. If you have that state of irritability, if you have some anxiousness, it can really just help to calm the nervous system.
And and what's the scientific or botanical name of chamomile that people can look for?
So there are two different types of chamomile, and there's a German chamomile and a Roman chamomile, and it's the German chamomile that most people are looking for. And to be honest, I don't have it right in front of me, and the name escapes me, but I believe it's
it's all good. I know
yeah,
what it's
no.
like to be interviewed, and you're just like, wait a minute, I know this.
I know I
master
can
at it.
see it. I can see it's like matriarcha, or it's very similar to. It reminds me of something very maternal and matriarchal. That's kind of how I think of chamomile, is like the mother herb that's helping the children. But yeah, it's something like matriarcha, and I can't think of the exact spelling.
So is the best way to take chamomile for sleep in a tea form, because we can drink herb teas?
A lot of the sedative herbs I like to take in tea form, especially because it's the warmth is actually soothing to the body. And so it's physically soothing as you're drinking it. And just the process of, boiling the water and steeping the cup of tea and drinking it, that whole process can be a ritual that helps your body to just calm down and know that it's time to go to sleep. So a lot of these herbs I do suggest taking as a tea. However, some of them can certainly be taken as tinctures as well. I don't really prefer capsules, just because capsules or herbs that are made into capsules have to go through more processing. The herbs have to be ground into a powder and then encapsulated, and then they're often sitting on the shelf in a warehouse, and then sitting on a shelf in an herb store. So I prefer to get herbs that are more fresh and haven't gone through as much processing. But on the other hand, I find that people that are new to herbs, sometimes they're just more familiar with a capsule and the process of taking a capsule. So it depends on where you are in your herbal journey. But I do really love, particularly for insomnia, to use herbs as a tea, as a warm tea, because it does have that benefit of kind of readying your body for sleep as you go through that ritual.
And with that, let's take another break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors. You're listening to the Natural Healing Show with you for UK Health Radio. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer. So Vanessa Nixon, naturopath and author, as you know, one of the herbs that I see most commonly in sleep formulas where there's combinations of herbs is actually valerian. What are the healing properties of valerian, and the scientific name for it, and when do you recommend valerian?
I love valerian. I've had a very long relationship with valerian. It is Valeriana officinalis. And valerian has some really unique things about it. Number one is that it has a really kind of a musty, earthy smell. And sometimes it's been described to me as smelling like old dirty socks. Some people do not like the smell of valerian. I actually love the smell of it. It has this musky, earthy scent that to me just makes me feel kind of warm and fuzzy. And so just that in itself helps me to relax. It has a certain essential oil content, and that's why it has such a strong scent that's coming from the volatile oils in the plant. But it has been recognized as a sedative or relaxing herb for over 2,000 years. We have literature going back thousands of years on the use of valerian. So it has a lot of different ways. And this is probably why you've seen it in so many different formulas, because there are so many different ways that it can help. So it's helpful for anxiety. It's helpful for that kind of restlessness that you can get from anxiety, but also from pain. You know, a lot of people are taking things to help them sleep because they have pain, and that's what's keeping them awake. Especially if it's muscular tension, if it's that kind of pain, valerian is super helpful as a muscle relaxant. And sometimes that's how it's used, is as a muscle relaxant. So it can be very helpful in pain-induced insomnia, body tension, when you just have tension in your body you're not able to release. Valerian can be really helpful for that. So in this way, it can be used for physical tension as well as psychological tension and anxiety. So it has these mild pain relieving effects, as well as muscle relaxing effects, as well as having sedative properties. Another thing that is really interesting about valerian, and we don't see this with a lot of herbs, is that in a certain percentage, a very small percentage of the population, valerian actually has the opposite effect. So instead of helping people calm down and relax and go to sleep, it brings on like a sort of like a stimulation. It stimulates them. And so for those people, it's used for the opposite. It's used for you know, kind of waking up and stimulating the body a little bit. So it's one of those herbs that you want to try out to see if it's going to be a good one for you, or if you're one of the, you know, less than 10% of the population that it has the opposite effects for. Some people do find that with valerian, it works so well that they can get just slightly a groggy feeling the next morning. So again, you want to try it out. And it can be a good one to add just a small amount to a formula, because of the fact that it is so sedative that it can be just a little bit too much for some people if used alone. And again, as with all of the herbs that we've talked about so far, you don't want to use them with pharmaceutical sedatives. You don't want to use these because they potentiate their effects, and you could get too much sedation. So you don't want to use it with pharmaceutical medications.
And, you know, since you brought that up, I have a client years ago who was literally arrested and taken to jail after taking a pharmaceutical drug to help her sleep. And she had a car wreck. They took her dog was with her at the time. So they put her dog in a kill shelter and her in the jail from the side effects of taking a pharmaceutical drug.
Wow.
And this is a professional individual, highly successful. And, you know, I won't name the drug, but, you know, there's reasons we do natural healing, right? And so, Vanessa Nixon, in your opinion, in your professional opinion, what are the advantages of using herbs for sleeping over drugs, over pharmaceutical drugs?
Right. That's a great question. I think that there are many different advantages. The first one, and the one that I think is so important to me, is that our bodies were designed to assimilate plants. And so herbs have a particular synergy with our bodies, with our organs, with the way that our bodies, run. And so it's not the same with pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are a foreign substance, and they have an action on our bodies, whereas herbs work with our bodies. We have this synergy. So our bodies know what to do with herbs, and herbs know what to do in our bodies. It's almost like plants have, they have their own innate intelligence. And so that's one of the things that I love so much about plant medicine, is that, plants have their own innate intelligence, our bodies have their own innate intelligence, and they work together. So it's this magical combination. Whereas pharmaceuticals have an action on our bodies. Our bodies don't have that same synergy. And so you have to be really, really careful about dosages and about combinations with pharmaceuticals, because we just don't have the same history of thousands of years of knowledge and documentation and safety that we do with plants, compared to pharmaceutical medication. Using prescription drugs the way that they were intended is, I think, now like the third leading cause of death in the US. So you just have to be so much more careful and work very carefully with your healthcare provider if you're going to be using pharmaceuticals. Whereas again, with herbs, you definitely want to be safe. You want to know what you're doing, but their track record of safety is superior.
Now,
So they're very safe. They work well with your body, and they're accessible. They're so much more easily accessible. Like I said earlier, you can grow your own, or you can, go to an herb shop. And if you don't have that available, you can go to the grocery store and go to the spice aisle, and find herbs there. So they're extremely accessible for everybody.
now let's talk about hops. So a lot of people, when they think about hops, they think about beer.
Right.
And
Right.
what are the healing properties of hops? And what's the botanical name? And how is hops as an herb for sleeping different from beer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that I get a lot when talking about herbs for insomnia, because people do know hops for beer. That is what people know it for. And it is best known for that. And, when you think about drinking beer, what does it do? Why do people love to drink beer? One of the reasons is it relaxes you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It calms you. So the botanical name for hops is Humulus lupulus. It's one of those herbs that's hard to say 3 times fast.
Yeah.
And it has this very long history of being used not only in beverages, but also being used medicinally as a sedative. And especially, again, when you have that particular kind of insomnia where you're very restless, and you have anxiety. And so it's one of the reasons why people love beer is because it just gives your body that relaxing feeling. It stops that feeling of restlessness. It just kind of calms your nervous system. It has this overall relaxing effect on your body. It eases tension. The one thing that, it again has the same contraindication. You don't want to use it with sedative pharmaceuticals, but it has one other contraindication, and that is that you don't want to use hops with people who have moderate to severe depression, because it does have this effect of kind of having a depressive effect on the nervous system. So if you're experiencing anxiety, if your nervous system is overstimulated, it would be a great choice. But if you are already in a state of depression, hops is not the herb for you.
Now, another one that I see a lot in sleep formulas or all stress formulas is ashwagandha. So
Yes.
will you tell us about ashwagandha, botanical name and its benefits?
Yeah, ashwagandha. And again, I don't have the botanical name, I'm sorry, of
I think
ashwagandha.
it's withania.
I believe it's withania, but uh,
Yes, withania
so
something or another, something,
right,
some.
I don't know the second part of the
Yeah.
botanical name. But ashwagandha is an Ayurvedic herb, and Ayurveda is the traditional healing system of in India and some of the other Southeast Asian countries. And one of the things I love, I'm not an expert in Ayurvedic medicine, but one of the things that I do love about herbs that are used in Ayurveda is that Ayurveda has written documentation that goes back 5,000 years. So it's uh, one of the healing systems that we have the most written documentation on. So there's a lot that you can study. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of history of the safety and the efficacy of herbs that are used in the Ayurvedic system. And one of them is ashwagandha. And we talked earlier about some of the different categories of herbs, and I mentioned adaptogens. And ashwagandha is an adaptogen. And you mentioned stress, that you see ashwagandha in not only formulas for insomnia, but also for stress. And that's because of its adaptogenic properties. So adaptogens help your body adapt to stress. And they do that through the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in the body, that hormonal pathway. And so it helps your body from that foundational hormonal system to adapt to stress, to lower cortisol levels. And so if your insomnia is due to stress, if that's the reason that you're having problems sleeping, then you might want to look to an adaptogenic herb like ashwagandha. And as I said, it's been used for thousands of herbs. We have lots of research and the documentation on its safety. It helps because it's an adaptogen, and it helps to calm the nervous system and help it adapt to stress. It is really helpful for the mental states that keep you awake. Anxiety, depression, when you just can't slow your mind down. When you have a lot of things on your mind due to stress, it can just help promote that mental calm and reduce the anxiety, reduce the depression. Another thing that adaptogens do, because they help your body adapt to stress, is they're kind of like balancers. So whether it's anxiety or depression, ashwagandha can help bring you back to balance. It's especially helpful for people who are just feeling really run down and worn out. Again, that's, something that people who are under stress often get to, that state of exhaustion, where their body just feels run down and they feel mentally worn out. And so ashwagandha can be one of those herbs you can think about taking over time. Most of the adaptogens, it's helpful to take them long term so that they can help restore that foundational hormonal pathway in your body. So it can help to restore a normal sleep cycle. So somebody who's had their sleep disturbed for a long period of time due to stress, this can help their body naturally restore the normal sleep cycle and decrease that anxiety, soothe the nervous system. And one of the things about ashwagandha, I like to use it a lot in menopause, women who are perimenopause, mid or postmenopause. Stress is one of the things that is often at the root of many of the symptoms that we can experience during that time. And so ashwagandha is one of the herbs that was one of my go-to herbs for that period of life. There has been some some question about whether or not it should be used during pregnancy. So that's one place where you would definitely want to work with a practitioner. If you're pregnant and you're thinking about using ashwagandha, I wouldn't use it on your own if you're not an herbalist during pregnancy. So you want to just have caution for that. But again, you don't want to use it with pharmaceutical sedatives.
So, Vanessa Nixon, you are the author of I'm going to try and say this right. Metamorphosis Rituals, Spells, and Natural Remedies for Peri, Mid, and Postmenopausal Women. So, as you know, there can be hundreds of reasons why people don't sleep well. But one of the most common periods of time when women have trouble sleeping is during the time when our hormones are changing. Why do women go through interrupted sleep during when our hormones change?
That's a great question. And, you know, the endocrine system really is the foundation for almost all the systems of the body. And so when we have hormone imbalance, which often happens during the menopausal journey because our hormones are changing. And then all of the stress that we have, not only coming from the changes in our body, but the external stresses of our lives. You know, it's interesting that during the menopausal phase, women often experience many, many changes in their lives. You know, they might go through changes in their relationship. They often are going through changes in careers, either retiring or starting a brand new career. Often they're empty nesters for the first time. And so there's a lot changing externally in their lives. There are so many changes that are going on in their bodies. And then we have this internalized stress from our culture. You know, menopause is not looked at kindly in our culture. And so we have this conditioning that menopause is a really negative thing in a woman's life, and that her usefulness is at an end because she can no longer bear children. And so we have these, you know, these undercurrents of negativity that can cause us a lot of stress. And so when we have stress, that is going to affect our hormones. It's going to raise our cortisol levels. And cortisol is a master hormone that affects all the minor hormones, like the reproductive hormones, estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And so we get these fluctuations of hormones because of all of this stress. And so when our hormones are fluctuating, it's going to affect the melatonin cycle. You know, cortisol and melatonin are in direct relationship. And so when our cortisol goes up, not only can it cause fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone, but it also affects melatonin, which is the hormone that regulates our sleep. And so oftentimes when we're in stressful periods of our life, especially during the menopausal phase, we see that cortisol is affecting melatonin. So cortisol and melatonin kind of do this dance. And, you know, in the earlier parts of the day, we're supposed to have higher cortisol, and then it kind of fluctuates. But then toward the end of the day, cortisol is supposed to be going low, and that's when melatonin goes up. It's supposed to be low during the early parts of the day when cortisol is high, and then it's supposed to go up during the evening and at night, and that's what helps us to sleep. But when our cortisol is elevated and we're having all of these imbalances, it really affects the melatonin. And so that's one of the reasons why we have so many problems sleeping. There can be other reasons as well, but that's one of the most common that I see. And so really addressing cortisol, addressing stress, using adaptogens is one of the key resources that we have for helping to balance out the endocrine system during the phase.
Vanessa Nixon, incredible information. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your years of experience. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. We've been talking today about herbs for sleep. Our guest today has been Vanessa Nixon. My name is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. The wonderful Vanessa Nixon, you can find her about her work at herbsofgracehealingarts.com and also herbsofgrace.com. And you can check out her book, Metamorphosis Rituals, Spells, and Natural Remedies for Peri, Mid, and Postmenopausal Women. And remember, when you're having trouble sleeping, you can turn to the plant world and herbs. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.